would hop on here real quick and step outside of my comfort zone for a very impromptu IG Live to do something a little bit different than normal. I wanted to read to you a chapter from one of my favorite water books of all time, written by Theodor Schwenk, who's one of my favorite water researchers of all time. And before we dive into that, I thought I would just remind you that we have the one and only once per year live Spirit of Water course coming up a week from today. So on Tuesday, November 7th, we will start a 2-month deep dive into all things water mystery, the esotericism, the spirituality, the deep mysteries, the ancient indigenous teachings about water wisdom, the recent findings in astrobiophysics and cosmology and the quantum physics of water that echo a lot of what the ancients told us about water. We'll be diving into the mystery school teachings about water from all of the major religions, all of the teachings about holy water that I had the opportunity to learn while I was studying with the water priests of the Agama tradition. It's basically 18 hours worth of profound teachings on all of the most sacred aspects of our living liquid life force. And it's basically the distillation of my 14 years worth of study into water. So I really hope that you can join us for that. If you're interested, go to waterislife.academy and you'll be able to sign up there. And it's a really great deal. It's only $222 for all 18 hours of teaching. It's actually 8 different master classes. We'll be meeting together every Tuesday for 2 months throughout November and December. And with every module, you also receive a workbook. And the workbooks alone are worth over $33 each, and they're each a 28-day guided practice. So for the next 8 months of 2024, you'll be set up with 8 28-day workbooks so that you'll be able to really implement these teachings into your life. This isn't just about head knowledge. This is about really stewarding our relationship with water and living in a new way as stewards of these sacred body water vessels and as water keepers and water guardians in our lives, and letting that draw us deeper and deeper into the mystery of our own connection with the divine. So I hope you'll join us for that. There are payment plans available as well. If $222 doesn't feel accessible for you right now, you can break it into 2 payments, or there's also an afterpay option. So enough with the introductions. I hope you'll join us for that. And one of the things we will be going over in the course is, what does it mean to be alive? How does water actually bring life to everything? How does water create life? Why is it that we say that some water is living and other water is dormant? And how does our understanding of water impact our own vibrance and vitality and our relationship to life itself? And so in that theme, I wanted to, again, do something a little different today and read to you a chapter from this book by Theodor Schwenk that is specifically about what is living water. Those who keep up with the developments in any phase of today's water problem constantly come across references to living water and dead water. For some, these are perfectly familiar terms and concepts they use every day in their professional practice. Others reject them on the ground that since water possesses none of the characteristics of living organisms, it cannot be spoken of as either alive or dead. Big city dwellers who go into mountain country and drink from a ceaselessly bubbling spring in some mountain meadow know firsthand what living water is. Precisely because they come from a big city, they can really distinguish between dead and living water. They know, of course, that city water has to meet strict sanitary standards, but they've had personal experience of the vast difference between that water and the water that they drink from mountain springs. And though what comes out of city faucets can be counted on not to contain coliform bacteria or other toxic organisms and is sure to be free of nitrates and phosphates, can these criteria suffice when it comes to characterizing what they know firsthand as living water? In dealing with modern water problems, the inevitable question arises of how to describe and verbalize the concept of living and dead water, despite immediate experience and the familiarity of those terms. We will try to work out such a concept in the following pages. Let us begin by recalling some unspoiled brook that we may have seen making its way through dark forest depths, now burbling over pebbly stretches, now pent up in quiet pools. It sparkles in the changing play of light that breaks through the screen of foliage above. It leaps ahead in rippling wavelets alternating between soft murmuring and silvery tinkling. It takes a meandering course among the trees, twisting this way and that, as though to make its lively game last longer. Surely this water cannot be called anything but living. If we pick up a stone along the bank, its wet underside and the hole it came out of will be found all a-wriggle with tiny living creatures. Should water that contains such life be designated living? We certainly do not want the water that comes out of our faucets full of it, even though its presence is considered by science to be one of the best indicators of water's excellence, and scientific classifications are actually based on the presence or absence of that life. Nevertheless, none of it is welcome in our drinking water, whether it comes out of faucets or from mountain springs. The concept of living water must be built on some other sort of criteria. What is it that attracts us so powerfully to living water? Do we perhaps feel that water flowing out of faucets and dark city flats is dead and almost unreal because of imponderable elements in the environment? Whereas water that constantly pours out of a spring in the middle of a flower-filled mountain meadow, sparkling in the pure cold air and in light reflected from shimmering snow peaks round about, perfectly satisfies our concept of what living water is. Our age feels the need to form concepts of even the most livingly experienced realities. And so too in the case of living water, which we want to grasp in the double sense of both understanding what it is and how to have it and hold on to it. But if we take this grasping literally and try to take hold of water, it slips through our hands and flows away unless we put it in some sort of container. If the container is solid, we can catch water in it. Then it quiets down immediately. But this means that it is already well on the way to being dead, to losing the quality that originally made it living water in the first place. And the concepts we form of it suffer the same fate. The moment one tries to catch the real nature of water in a hard and fast definition, the reality of it is no longer there. To be adequate, concepts of water must retain something of water's liveliness and movement, of the way it lends itself to constant change. They must be capable of metamorphosis, shaped in harmony with and able to express water's functions. If we ask again at this point, what specifically is living water? We see that another question has to be answered first, namely, what is life? Life manifests itself in quite specific, tangible attributes in every living creature, in growth, reproduction, metamorphosis, that is, changes of form that take place in organisms, in metabolic functions, which include the digesting of food and excreting of wastes, in the regulation of chemical, warmth, or other processes, in tides of burgeoning and fading that rise and fall in definite time patterns, always subject to life's characteristic rhythms. Are these attributes to be found in water? Does water grow? Can it reproduce? We certainly know water to be the very prototype of everything formless and fluidic. How then could it possibly be said to undergo metamorphosis, to change its form as living organisms do? Is it subject to digestive and excretory processes? Does it possess definite organs that perform typical organ functions? Can it adapt itself to fixed determining factors? Does water evolve into an organism and then die? Are autonomous rhythms, such as the heartbeat of an animal, to be found in water? The answer to all these questions is, of course, obvious. Water possesses none of these characteristics of living organisms. Whether it turns out to be, we feel sure, whatever it turns out to be, we feel sure that it must rank lower than a living creature. But if that is so, must our search for an adequate definition of living water not end up in a blind alley? It would seem so, yet what of the experience of people who work professionally with water and daily apply the concept of dead and living water in their practice? Perhaps we had better wait to draw conclusions until we have looked at the problem from another side. Everyone knows that water has a close affinity with all forms of life, so we may ask what the connection is, whether manifestations of life can occur in the absence of water. Is growth possible without it? Propagation? Metamorphosis? Are digestion and excretion conceivable where water is lacking? Is it not essential to conversion processes and organ functions? Is it not the great mediator and regulator of chemical, warmth, and other processes, both in living organisms and outside them? Can a living organism even come into being without water's help? And in the last analysis, could rhythm exist in organism if there were no fluids? Here again, to put the question is to find the answer is self-evident. None of the above life characteristics would be present without water. Life depends on water for its very life. Again, we are confronted by a riddle. Water does not manifest a single life characteristic, and yet where water is lacking, there can be no life. All the factors noted depend on water. At this point, the ground beneath our feet begins to seem somewhat less than solid, as can often happen with true riddles. But isn't it perfectly natural to feel at sea when pursuing the theme of water? Perhaps the state of affairs may even prove an asset and set us on the right course for our further inquiry. Why then does water, which has no life characteristics of its own, form the very basis of life in all life's various manifestations? Because water embraces everything, is in and through everything. Because it rises above the distinctions between plants and animals and human beings. Because it is a universal element shared by all, itself undetermined, yet determining. Because, like the primal mother it is, it supplies the stuff of life to every living thing. And what makes water capable of all of these feats? Renouncing any form of its own, it becomes the creative matrix for form in everything else. I've got to pardon Bruce out there, he's having a fit with somebody walking by. Renouncing any form of its own, it becomes the creative matrix for form in everything else. Renouncing any life of its own, it becomes the primal substance of all life. Renouncing material fixity, it becomes the implementer of material change. Renouncing any rhythm of its own, it becomes the progenitor of rhythm elsewhere. Is it any wonder, then, that in all highly developed cultures, water has always been held as sacred, as the magically transforming substance, as the very water of life? Now that we have considered the plant, animal, and human kingdoms as specimens of living organisms, let us try to come a step closer to the answer to our question by bringing that all-inclusive living being, the earth organism, into the picture as the living whole that it is. There exist comprehensive discussions of the earth as a living entity in which it is shown that such a concept is no mere theory, but a reality quite susceptible of human experience. These studies range from the works by great astronomer Johann Kepler to contemporary presentations by Gunther Wachsmuth, Walter Kloos, and others. Contemplating this vast living organism, Earth, which by the way is called the Gaia theory, and I highly recommend you all look it up. Contemplating this vast living organism, Earth, one's attention is drawn again and again to the layer structure of its enveloping mantles and to the rhythms that play in and through them. A glance at the surface configuration of the Earth reminds us, for example, that 70% of it is covered by water. Its watery surface and its immense extension provides a plane of contact with the atmosphere. Here an exchange sets in between the elements of air and water that moves in both directions, up and down. Thus, water is absorbed into the atmosphere, where it works as the great regulator in matters of climate and meteorological processes and their rhythms. I just want to state that again because it's really important in all of our climatological concerns in the modern day. Water is the great regulator in matters of climate and in meteorological processes and their rhythms. If you want to learn more about how water is the master regulator of the climate, I recommend looking up the work of Dr. Walter Genet. He's an amazing climatologist. Meteorologists, whose daily observation of the weather and its changes has led to the development of a special sense shared by all outdoorsmen for what goes on in the atmosphere, often finding that they have to speak of processes there as something living. August Schmaus, for example, talks of biological concepts in meteorology, of an orchestral score of atmospheric happenings, with entrances in the time pattern of the year's unrolling seasons. Paul Rathjen says in his treatise on the dynamics of cyclones that the atmosphere behaves like a living creature. And elsewhere in the same work we read, For one thing, cyclones have a metabolic process without which they could not exist. They constantly draw new masses of air into their vortices and excrete other masses in their outward spiralings. Then, too, they have a typical life history with characteristics beginning, developing, and aging phases. They reproduce themselves not in a wave-like spreading out in space, but like a living creature, in the sense that a young frontal cyclone is born out of the womb of an adult central cyclone. We know that cyclones, low-pressure areas, have to do with water. A low and rain belong in the same concept. Thus, the life of the earth organism as a whole is just as closely bound up with water as the life of any of the creatures on it. Rhythmic processes are present in the cosmos that play into the various atmospheric strata, giving rise to the rhythms found wherever water is. Rudolf Steiner, Gunther Wadsmuth, Ernst Marti, George Adams, Hermann Poppelbaum, Lily Kolinsko, and others have acquainted us with these formative forces raying in from the cosmos. They have taught us to distinguish between them and to recognize how they build and shape all of Earth's living organisms. Everything in nature forms one indivisible fabric woven of living interchange of water. An all-encompassing world of life comes into being from the interplay of cosmic peripheral forces, meteorological forces, forces of the elements, the earth, water, and all its living organisms. A great deal of evidence has already been uncovered showing that the earth and the various forms of life present on it function in harmonious accord with universal processes, and every year much more evidence turns up. Every rhythm, from moon rhythms reflected in the hydrosphere and planetary rhythms known to meteorology, right down to the numberless physiological rhythms found in every kind of living organism, is based on water's mediation. For example, woodcutters in the forests of Brazil still set the price of the wood they fell by the date of its cutting, that is, by the moon phase, because its water content, and thus its keeping quality, depends on these cosmic influences. The pattern of movement planets weave in space are also reflected in the structure of the various plant families. Thus, for example, the Venus pattern appears in the regular pentagram common to all rose petals. If it were not for the mediating role that water plays, these formative forces of the cosmos could not work their way into terrestrial manifestations. In the tides, the seas are caught up in the swing of cosmic rhythms that they then hand on to the earth and its creatures. All movement in water is affected by cosmic formative forces and serves the function of transmitting them. Thus, water occupies a median position between Earth and the universe, and is the port of entry through which cosmic peripheral forces pass into the Earth realm. May we not call water nature's central organ, its heart, the pulsing, oscillating drop that lets the whole cosmos pass through it? Its functions make it indeed the primal organ. It transmits cosmic forces and activities into the earth, just as the heart mediates between processes of the upper and lower parts of the organism, and functionally speaking, embraces all other organs. Water does not grow because it is itself growth. Growth as function. Growth uncommitted to any particular growth pattern. It is not subject to metamorphosis because it is itself the universal element of change that runs through every possible form without becoming fixed in any. While not itself subject to regulation, it serves as nature's regulator in numberless instances. Though it possesses no organs of its own, it is itself the primal organ, jointly shared by everything that lives, an organ that remains at the functional level rather than presses on to the physical organic stage. None of life's attributes come to outward expression in water, but they are all functionally present in it in the form of possibility, capacity, and action. What wisdom we find built into man and nature, like the wisdom that controls warmth in the bloodstream and keeps the normal level at precisely 98.6 degrees. Even a slight deviation from that temperature spells illness. How wisely it is arranged that water has the least specific warmth at exactly 98.6 degrees, and therefore absorbs warmth most rapidly at that temperature. But water possesses many qualities beyond those singled out above for mention, and these enable it to be the matrix of all living things. What a composition of wisdom every living organism is, each single facet of it revealing new marvels. And water is wisdom's very element, the focus in which wisdom is concentrated and out of which its activity flows into every least and greatest living thing. Let me say that again, I love that quote. What a composition of wisdom every living organism is, each single facet of it revealing new marvels. And water is wisdom's very element, the focus in which wisdom is concentrated and out of which its activity flows into every least and greatest living thing. Indeed, it is because life is wisdom and water wisdom's element that there can be such a thing as the water of life. Now that we have come to know water as the functional compendium of all outer forms of life, let us look from this new angle at some of the life attributes discussed above. Take nutrition, for example. Not only is the movement of foodstuffs through the organism unthinkable without the help of water, but over 99% of all chemical and other changes depend on water. Drinking water of a quality that meets health requirements holds the balance between alkalinity and acidity. Water, of course, occurs in greater volume in the ocean than anywhere else in nature, and the composition of seawater is almost identical with that of blood, the only difference being that seawater contains magnesium, where human blood contains iron, a fact that must be looked at in relation to the needs of air-breathing organisms. What can be observed as the growth process in trees, for example, is present in water as pure function. Moving water consists of layers that continually flow past one another at varying speeds. We find the same thing happening in the tree's cambium layer, where growth takes place. There, too, newly formed cells slit past the old ones in an outward flow that widens the cambium ring without splitting it like ripples in a pond. The vortex is the function pattern of all the metamorphoses and shapings found in water. When layers flowing at different speeds pass one another, a process of deflection and rolling up takes place, and this leads to the formation of a vortex. We find the same thing going on wherever growth speeds vary in an organism. An example is the way a stem or leaf bends and starts to roll up when one side grows faster than the layer next to it. Organs are also built on the model of the vortex forming process in water, as may be noted in the way they always create a boundary between an inner and outer space. Reproduction, in the sense of repetition, is everywhere to be found in water, again, of course, at the functional level. Trains of vortices are an example. Here we see a process similar to the spawning of daughter cyclones in a water-saturated atmosphere as described by Paul Raithjen. In the case of rhythm, water must be called its very element. The word rhythm is derived from the Greek word to flow, and water does indeed flow rhythmically. This can be seen in the rhythmic pattern of waves and meandering watercourses, just as it can be heard in the audible rhythms of brooks and oceans. Numerical relationships found in physiological rhythms appear again in phenomena of air and water. Sound, for example, travels 4 times as fast through seawater as it does through air. The same proportion is found again in the rhythmic processes of man's fluid and airy organisms in the 4-1 pulse to breathing rate. Such facts make it evident how profoundly related water is to all life functions, and most especially to those in the human organism. Many of water's qualities also show a distinct relationship to soul and spiritual attributes in human beings. Not only does water serve the cause of bodily life, but also that of the inner man, in that, for example, the brain floats in water and is thus relieved of the pull of gravity. Physiologically speaking, this is what makes thinking possible. Certain descriptions of water can equally well be applied to soul capacities. We speak of the power to cleanse, to purify, to heal, and both water and the soul are referred to as in balance, clear, reflective, refreshing. And just as healthy souls refrain from going to extremes, so water holds a balance between extremes of heavy and light with its buoyancy, between alkaline and acid, between warmth and cold, and with its rainbow colors between light and dark. And because it is so balanced an element, it has the capacity to regulate, to heal, to create a mobile, living equilibrium. But when water comes into a resting state of balance, it stagnates, loses its life, and is as though paralyzed. And that's the water most people drink. Since water is universal and a stranger to one-sidedness, it is the means whereby the full range of life is made possible. Hence, it is truly the water of life. The concept, water, might best be expressed as universality through renunciation. Wisdom's element. Because of the wisdom that makes it what it is fitted to be the carrier of cosmic forces. What then is living water? It is water that contains not only the cosmic elements radiating life into the earth sphere, but that also has an inherent relationship to man as body, soul, and spirit. Today, this may sound like anthropomorphism, but there is a practical aspect to the statement. As we contemplate the civilization of our time, we can be aware of its water problems, but also of the direction we must take to solve them. If water is deprived of its universal nature by becoming tainted with substances like salts and detergents, it cannot maintain its universal function and continue to be the transmitter of nature's living wisdom. Wholesome water is water that maintains itself in active balance. But how far the sewage-laden rivers of today are from such a definition? They can no longer be recipients of cosmic forces. In many cases, indeed, the opposite is true. They can only be called chemical infernos, veritable hells. If we are to solve the water problems facing us today, and this includes such technical measures as must be taken, there is no other path open to us than to rediscover water's cosmic aspect, and this calls for nothing less than a new sense of what life is. From now on, everything depends on our developing what one professional in the field of water sanitation recently described as water consciousness. But that means recognizing that water is the carrier of cosmic energies and understanding how it can be rehabilitated to become once again their carrier. Does this provide us with a concept of what living water is? We have come to know it as the bearer of wisdom, as the instrument of cosmic forces and orderings, in short, of life. We have found it to be living nature's primary organ through which everything alive must pass. While the work of our institute takes its motivation from the restorative impulse vital to the solution of our time's great problems, it seeks that solution through grasping the true nature of water, seeks it, one might say, in a supersensible water-conscious intent on taking the spirit of nature as the guide of its science and technology. So that's the end of that chapter, and that's really the inspiration behind the Spirit of Water course as well. It is seeking the solution to our deepest spiritual conundrums through the source of life itself, truly recognizing scientifically how it's possible that water is the median between the earth and cosmic forces. We dive really deep into that in the Spirit of Water course, including how it is that our bodies of water mediate astronomical and astrological influences, how water is itself the blueprint of astrology and why the practice of astrology can be so accurate, how the formative forces of the cosmos actually imprint on the fetus when it is inside the amniotic fluid of the mother's womb, which is basically seawater. We talk a lot about the mind, body, and spirit of water, how water itself as a living organism has a mind, a body, and a spirit just like we do, and that actually our mind, body, and spirit are mirrored in the mind, body, and spirit of water. We go really deep into some esoteric things, so I hope you will join us for that. Once again, you can find it at waterslife.academy. To sign up, we're going to be starting 1 week from today. We'll be talking about Theodor Schwenk's work, Emoto's work, of course, Schauberger's work. We'll be talking about Dr. Patrick Flanagan's work, Dr. Henry Kawanda, Dr. Carly Nude, Andreas Schultz. We'll be diving into some of the most profound water wisdom that I've had the opportunity to discover. And then we also have a community forum as well, so you can discuss your findings and your insights and share your homework from each session with everybody else who will be in the course with you. So thanks for joining me for this, and drop a note below. What was your favorite aspect of that chapter? Was there something new that you learned, or a way that you started to perceive water in a different way? What was your biggest insight from that? Thanks again for joining, and stay hydrated. Have a beautiful day.